Please join me in welcoming Senator Rand Paul.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, he didn't tell the whole story. They said, "You want to speak to the National League of Cities?" Oh, it's a great group, love to. And then he said, "You get to speak about FEMA." I was like, "Do you have somebody that'll wake people up after the first minute or two?" I said, "What about this? I'll bet you I'll get a better attention and more applause if we talk about how great city governments are and how the federal government sucks." So that is the theme. So I imagine many of you had to travel a long way to be here today, and I'm glad that you invited me. As I'm sure you've noticed, you aren't the only people in Washington this week. Every spring, people come, thousands of people, to speak to their elected officials and the bureaucrats charged with regulating everything from mattress tags to nuclear reactors. Judge for yourself which one of those really needs Washington's involvement. But if you travel to this spot in 1790, about 3 years after the ratification of the Constitution, shortly after Congress selected this location for the new capital, you'd have found nothing but farms and swamps. At the time of its founding, only about 5,000 people lived here in the city. The selection of 10 square miles of sparsely populated farmland was our nation's new capital. It was selected, but it was no accident. A number of other cities, Philadelphia, New York, Baltimore, had already served as temporary capitals. But the founders recognized that if our new experiment in constitutional government was going to work, that we needed a capital that symbolized the freedom of our citizens, not the glory of a monarch or the conquest of an empire. James Madison, writing in Federalist number 43, noted that establishing a new independent capital was necessary to avoid providing the federal government with an imputation of awe or influence. We were not to be a monarchy. We were going to be a democracy. The creation of the city of Washington made the federal government independent of any single state while also ensuring that it occupied a small piece of American life. That was the intention. Small federal government, larger local government. A small national capital was founded to reflect the small role our federal government was supposed to play. Washington has changed some since 1790. The actual swamp was drained, but unfortunately it was replaced with a metaphorical swamp where special interests rule the day and the debt has become the greatest threat to our national security. Federalism, thank you. Those who didn't clap think that that's okay or what? Federalism, the system that was originally designed, was intended to ensure that the leaders closest to the people, mayors, state and local representatives, governors, held the bulk of the responsibility for governing, while leaders far away in Washington focused on the few problems that were common to the entire nation. But today, you can't find a problem so localized that the federal government doesn't have a national solution to it. When you guys have already fixed a problem, it usually percolates up, and then we say, well, we should fix it too. I mean, almost all the things we get to really are local, have already been fixed by the time we get up here, and it's a charade. It's self-promotion. In 2025, federal agencies issued 2,400 final regulations, which, when printed, total over 61,000 pages. 61,000 pages of regulations. And that's not on top of zero, that's on top of 60,000 pages of regulations the year before, and the year before, and the year before. Because these bureaucrats are nameless and faceless, and you can't find them at City Hall, the regulations grow like cancer. Your constituents can find you. It may not be that you're smarter than the rest of us, but you have constituents that can find you. You have public meetings. All of those things are necessary for good government. Our founders sought to prevent this sort of regulatory tyranny and overreach by dispersing power between the federal government and the states and localities as a safeguard, as a check and balance. In Federalist number 10, Madison argues that the impulse to form a group and advocate for your own interest, even if your interests are averse to the interest of others, is inherent in human nature. Sort of like they're grasping for power. All men and women are seduced by power. That's why we divide up the power, so there are checks and balances. But where a faction makes up most of the population and advances interests adverse to the rights of a minority, even a constitutional republic can fall into the tyranny of a majority. The solution to this problem was to reserve most of the powers of the government to the states and localities. Rather than create a single Leviathan government that factions could fight to control, the genius of our system is that it allows the states to act as laboratories of democracy, so that even a country as large as ours can accommodate different cultures, lifestyles, and viewpoints, while also permitting national cooperation. Some of the most contentious issues of our days that probably you're split 50-50 on, you may not like this, but it's actually better that you have made local decisions on these things that are so controversial, because people tend to gravitate to areas where they're more comfortable with the law and with the culture. And I think this actually makes for a society less riven against each other when we can find a place in the country. Alabama's different than Massachusetts, but it's probably good that we allow people to live in Massachusetts and Alabama. This may sound familiar, all this talk about division of power, states and federal government. It should be, because it's the 10th Amendment, which prescribes that powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states and the people respectively. Many of the problems we face today are the result of abandoning this system that was designed by the founders. We no longer look to our local and state governments for solution. We think everything has to happen in Washington. Instead, when a problem arises, we tend to look, first and only place, we look to the federal government instead of looking locally. State and local governments, like those that you represent, are better equipped to meet the needs of the people than the federal government is. One advantage of federalism is that state and local governments can quickly adapt to changing circumstances. If a new problem arises in New York and you want to address it, they're free to do so. Their solution might be different than Alabama, may well be, but New York's responsible to its own citizens. It can tailor that policy to the unique needs of its constituents, rather than trying to piece together a policy that will work for every community across the country. If the new policy works, that's great. If it doesn't, then the city can drop the policy and try something else. Now, federalism and states' rights only protect you so much, as the people of New York may discover if they decide to have the government own the grocery stores. The best part about this system is that the citizens can escape bad policy by moving, or even policy you just don't like. They can move somewhere else. Even where a local government adopts a bad policy and refuses to get rid of it, a system that emphasizes local power is better. You can move to another city. It's even better. Because it's more local, it's easier to move to another city than it is another state or to another country. The smaller the division of government, the closer you can find a government that is tailored to your needs. If a citizen is unhappy about a state or a local law, they remain free to move somewhere else for decades. Citizens of certain states, we won't mention them, California and New York, have been showing their displeasure by voting with their feet and moving elsewhere. One of the reasons local governments are more adaptable than the federal government is that local leaders are far closer to their constituents. Constituents may need to travel 8 or 9 hours to speak to their member of Congress, but they may only need to travel 8 or 9 doors down to speak to their mayor. Empowering officials closest to the people also has a positive impact on our political climate. In a national debate, it can sometimes feel like your voice is drowned out by 350 million other voices. But you can walk into any city council meeting in America and see average citizens speaking directly with their elected officials, and that's the way most government ought to be. If we return to this system of federalism as designed with strong local and state governments, I imagine you'd see citizens more informed and more engaged. I think it's when people give up, when they become violent. I've said over and over again, and this is something I part with my party on, really both parties, all this redistricting to gerrymander these districts where there's no Republicans or no Democrats is going to lead in violence, and we shouldn't do it. When people feel like they have no representation is when they are going to be violent. It is crazy for California to have no Republican Congress, but it's also crazy for Texas to have no Democrat congressman. Election leaders are far less likely to waste your money if they know they have to face you in the supermarket, at church, at their kids' Little League game. If a mayor was accused of wasting 59 cents on every tax dollar he spent or she spent, they wouldn't remain mayor for very long. Yet year after year, Congress continues to be a rubber stamp for budgets that don't balance and funding bills that few members can even read. On the issue of being good stewards of the taxpayer's dollar, the federal government has much to learn from the states and cities. In fact, the feds could learn much from my home state of Kentucky. My state ended the 2025 fiscal year with a $131 million surplus and a $4 billion rainy day fund. My city of Bowling Green balances their budget, as probably almost all of your cities do, not because you're necessarily the greatest people in the world, although you might be, but because you have to. You spend what comes in. When somebody says we got to pave roads, you say we got enough to pave 10 roads and we want to pave 20. You decide which of the 10 roads you're going to pave. It's setting priorities. The only government you have in the United States of America that sets no priorities is your federal government. If you're against some kind of spending, they think you're a terrible person, and yet all I'm asking for is that we set priorities, and that the more important things we spend money on, and maybe the $1 million we spent studying Japanese quail to see if they're more sexually promiscuous on cocaine, maybe that could wait till next year. The states and cities routinely show that a balanced budget is possible when simply printing money is not an option. Cities and states are inherently more fiscally responsible because they have limitations on their borrowing. In short, cities and states don't have a Federal Reserve, and that's a good thing. Cities and states have to be disciplined. They have to make tough choices. That's why states and cities can be expected to balance their budgets, while the federal government will soon exceed $39 trillion. With that contrast, the feds have no authority to presume to tell you how to run your cities and states. You tell them, leave us the hell alone. The right to govern oneself is the essential building block of our society. And any government that purports to work on behalf of the broader community should be as close to that individual as possible. The role of the federal government is to protect the rights of the people, facilitate free exchange, and ensure the common defense. Almost everything else should be done by the cities and the states or the people. It shouldn't even be the role of the government to tell you, the people's closest representative, how to govern your communities. It's not the role of the federal government. So as you move forward and you talk about civility in politics and you talk about how we can all get along better, the smaller the federal government, the easier it is to have disagreements. There doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all on emotional social issues or emotional issues that really get us all enraged at each other. Make the decisions locally. So the decision may not be the same in California as it will be in Alabama, but guess what? We can get along more easily together the smaller the federal government is and the more power we leave at the states and localities. Thank you very much.